important issue. Mr. President, as the son of an immigrant, my dad came to this country at the age of 17 from Poland. I strongly support the concept of immigration reform, and I applaud the Judiciary Committee and all of those people who have been working hard on this legislation. And there are a lot of provisions within this bill that I think should be strongly supported by the American people. I strongly support a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, bringing undocumented workers out of the shadows and giving them legal status will make it more difficult, among many other things, for employers to undercut the wages and benefits of all workers and will be good for our entire economy. A very, very important step forward. I strongly support the DREAM Act to make sure that the children of illegal immigrants who are brought into this country by their parents years ago are allowed to become citizens. I strongly support providing legal status to foreign workers on family farms. Dairy farmers in Vermont and the owners of apple orchards in my state have told me that without these workers, they would go out of business, and that's obviously true in many, many parts of this country. We also need to make sure, as Senator McCain has just elaborated on, that our borders are more secure and prevent unscrupulous employers from hiring those who have come here illegally. All of those provisions are extremely important, are included in the legislation passed out of the Judiciary Committee last week, and are provisions that I support. And I want to commend my colleague from Vermont, Senator Pat Leahy, for his leadership on those issues. But let me tell you, Mr. President, some of what concerns me very much about the bill as it presently stands. And that is that in a time when nearly 14% of the American people do not have a full-time job, at a time when the middle class continues to disappear, and at a time when tens of millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, it makes no sense to me that the immigration reform bill includes a massive increase in temporary guest worker programs that will allow large corporations to import and bring into this country hundreds of thousands of temporary blue-collar and white-collar guest workers from overseas. That makes no sense to me at all. Mr. President, I am particularly concerned that at a time when college is becoming increasingly unaffordable, and every parent out there with a high school kid is worried about how that family is going to afford college for their kids, at a time when young people desperately need jobs to help pay for the cost of a college education, this bill will make it more difficult for young Americans to find the jobs that they need. Mr. President, today youth unemployment is over 16%, and the teen unemployment rate is over 25%. Unfortunately, many of the jobs that used to be performed by young Americans are now being done by foreign college students through the J-1 summer work travel program and the H-2B guest worker programs. Mr. President, millions of Americans, including myself and I suspect many members of Congress, earned money when they were young at summer jobs or at part-time jobs when they were in college in order to pay for the cost of college. And some of those people, some of Americans today, are working as waiters and waitresses. They're working as lifeguards. They're working as front desk clerks at hotels and resorts. They're working as ski instructors, as cooks, chefs, kitchen personnel, chambermaids, landscapers, and many other similar jobs. And there is nothing that any American has to be embarrassed about at working at any of those jobs or any other job in order to earn some income to pay the bills or to make some money in order to afford to go to college. There's nothing that anybody should be ashamed about doing that kind of work. What I worry about very much is the degree to which those jobs will be available for young Americans as a result of the J-1 program and the H-2B program. It pains me very deeply that with minority unemployment extraordinarily high, and I was just in Detroit last week talking to kids who are working so hard, and they're working for $7.25 an hour at McDonald's or other fast food places if they are lucky enough to get that work. And many of them would like to go to college but are unable to earn the money they need in order to go to college. And it seems to me terribly wrong that we have programs like this J-1 summer work travel program, which brings students from all over the world into the United States to take jobs that young Americans want to do. Mr. President, the J-1 program for foreign college students is supposed to be used as a cultural exchange program, a program to bring young people into this country to learn about our way of life, our customs, and to support international cooperation and understanding. And those are extremely important goals. I believe in that passionately. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, we started sister city programs with towns around the world in order to develop that type of understanding and cooperation. That is the theory of what the J-1 program is supposed to be, and a wonderful goal it is. Unfortunately, that is not what it is today. Today, the J-1 program has morphed into a low-wage jobs program to allow corporations like Hershey's and McDonald's and many, many others to replace young American workers with cheaper labor from abroad. Mr. President, each and every year, companies from all over this country are hiring more than 100,000 foreign college students in low-wage jobs through the J-1 summer work travel program. Unlike other guest worker programs, the J-1 summer work travel program does not require businesses to recruit American workers for these positions, offer jobs to willing and able Americans first, or to pay prevailing wages. In other words, if there are jobs out there that our young people would like to get in order to put aside a few bucks or help pay for the cost of a college education, the employer is not obliged to reach out to these young Americans. It is one thing for an employer to say, look, I reached out, tried to get some young people to do this job, couldn't find them, I had to go abroad. I can understand that. But that is not the requirement of this J-1 program. Mr. President, let me just read from a website of a foreign labor recruiter touting the benefits of using the J-1 summer work travel program to employers in the United States. This website is called joboffer.org, and this is one, as I understand it, of many. But here's what it says, and I quote from the website, joboffer.org. And this is going to employers who need unskilled workers for the summer. Quote, whether you are running an amusement park, a water park, a concession stand, a golf course, a circus, a zoo, or anything else where people come to enjoy themselves, it's a great idea not to miss the opportunities of the season and hire international seasonal workers to cover your growing staffing needs. International seasonal workers. JobOffer.org has experience in matching candidates from foreign exchange students with amusement firms all over the USA, covering every type of entry-level position you may want to cover with seasonal staffing. The Work and Travel USA program allows exchange students from abroad to work in the U.S. for up to 4 months during the buzz season under a J-1 visa. Joboffer.org is committed to understanding your needs as an amusement business and handling all the seasonal staffing procedures for you at absolutely no cost. Check out the list of positions typically filled with international exchange students." End of quote. Now, what this website is doing is telling employers, in this case, they're just focusing on amusement parks. But obviously it goes much beyond that into all kinds of resorts, many, many other areas. But what they are simply saying is that we need unskilled labor. Now, one would think that historically, one knows that historically in this country, that is what young people did. When you're in high school, when you're in college, you're trying to make a few bucks, you go out and you get a summer job, and maybe you can earn a couple of $1,000s. And maybe it starts you on a career, or maybe it's money to put aside to go to college. I did it. Many, many members of the Senate do it, and millions of young people in this country want to do it. And now what these companies are saying is, you don't need to hire kids in your community anymore. You don't have to reach out to minority kids who desperately need a job. The kids in Vermont who want to put away a few bucks to go to college, you don't have to do that anymore. We will help you bring young people from all over the world to do these jobs. You know, one of the arguments we hear, Mr. President, on the floor is that we need highly skilled workers because high-tech companies just can't attract the scientists and the engineers and the physicists and the mathematicians they need. And when we bring them in, these guys are going to help create jobs in America. Maybe. That's a whole other issue for discussion. But nobody can tell me that we need to bring young people from all over the world to work at entry-level jobs because there are not young Americans who want to do that job when the unemployment rate for young people in this country is extraordinarily high. Nobody with a straight face can make that claim. And here are some of the jobs being advertised on this very same website, and there are many websites like it. This one focuses on jobs within the amusement industry: ride operators, attendants, game operators, food service, flipping hamburgers, lifeguards. I guess we have no young people in America who are capable of being lifeguards. Nobody in America can swim and get a job as a lifeguard. I guess we need to bring people from all over the world to be lifeguards. Guest relations, admissions, security, games and attractions, merchandise, ground quality, season pass processor, entertainment, wardrobe, warehouse, safari gatekeepers and wardens, parking lot attendants. Parking lot attendants. Yeah, I guess nobody in America could be a parking lot attendant. Landscape, cash control. And here's the interesting point. The website, after mentioning all of these jobs specific to the amusement industry, they ask the following questions. What happens, interesting question, what happens when you use seasonal employment for your theme or amusement park? And here is the answer this foreign labor recruiter gives on their website. You cover your seasonal staffing needs with young, highly motivated, English-speaking international staff from 18 to 28 years old and cut costs by paying fewer taxes. Got that? You can bring in international workers, students from abroad, and one of the advantages that you have is you pay lower taxes on that foreign worker than you do for an American worker. In fact, Mr. President, under the J-1 summer work travel program, employers do not have to pay Medicare, Social Security, and unemployment taxes, which amounts to a payroll savings of about $8.45 per employee. What a bargain. So we are enticing, we're giving an incentive to a company to bring foreign workers into this country and saving them money by hiring foreign workers, at the expense of young Americans who certainly could do those jobs. Under the J-1 program, employers do not have to pay Social Security and Medicare payroll taxes. They don't have to pay unemployment taxes. They don't have to offer jobs to Americans first. They don't have to pay wages that are comparable to what American workers make. What employer in America would want to hire a young American as a lifeguard or a ski instructor or a waiter or a waitress or any other low-skill job when they could hire a foreign college student instead at a significant reduction in cost? Mr. President, I understand that the immigration reform bill that we are debating reforms this program by requiring foreign labor recruiters to pay a $500 fee for every foreign college student they bring into this country. Right now, foreign college students bear all of these costs. But in my opinion, Mr. President, that is not good enough. This program is a real disservice to the young people in this country. I believe, again, in cultural exchanges. I would put a lot more money into cultural exchanges so that our young people could go abroad, so that young people from all over the world could attend our high schools. That would be a great thing. But that is not what this J-1 program is. It is a program which is displacing young American workers at a time of double-digit unemployment among youth, and it is putting downward pressure on wages at a time when the American people are in many cases working longer hours for lower wages. In my opinion, this particular program should be abolished. Cultural program, yes, but bringing in young people to take jobs from young Americans, no. But, Mr. President, at the very least, if we're not going to abolish this program, we need to make sure that we have a comparable summer and year-round jobs program for our young people in order to help them pay for college and to move up the economic ladder. At the very least, that is what should be in this bill. That is why I will be filing an amendment today to the immigration reform bill to create a youth jobs program. My amendment would provide states with $1.5 billion in immediate funding to support a 2-year summer and year-round jobs program for low-income youth and economically disadvantaged young adults. This amendment is modeled on the summer and year-round youth jobs program included in President Obama's American Jobs Act. This amendment would build on the successes from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which provided $1.2 billion in funding for the WIA Youth Jobs Program. This program created over 374,000 summer job opportunities during 2009 and 2010 to young Americans who desperately needed those jobs. And this amendment, in fact, would create even more jobs. Mr. President, let me be very clear. The same corporations and businesses that support a massive expansion in guest worker programs are opposed to raising the minimum wage. They have long supported the outsourcing of American jobs. They have reduced the wages and benefits of American workers at a time when corporate profits are at an all-time high. In too many cases, the H-2B program for lower-skilled guest workers and the H-1B program for high-skilled guest workers are being used by employers to drive down the wages and benefits of American workers and to place American workers with cheap labor from abroad. The immigration reform bill that passed the Senate Judiciary Committee could increase the number of low-skilled guest workers by as much as 800% over the next 5 years and could more than triple the number of temporary white-collar guest workers coming into this country. And that is the basic issue, and that is my basic concern. At a time when unemployment is so high, does it really make a whole lot of sense to be bringing in hundreds of thousands of workers from all over the world into this country to fill jobs that American workers desperately need? Mr. President, the high-tech industry tells us that they need the H-1B program so that they can hire the best and the brightest science, technology, engineering, and math workers in the world, and that there just aren't enough qualified American workers in these fields. In some cases, let me be very honest, I think that that is true. I think there are some companies in some parts of the country that are unable to attract American workers to do the jobs that are needed, and I believe that in those instances, corporations should have the right to bring in foreign workers so that the corporation can do the business that it's supposed to be doing. But having said that, let me also tell you some facts. In 2010, 54% of the H-1B guest workers were employed in entry-level jobs and performed, and I quote, routine tasks requiring limited judgment, end of quote, according to the Government Accountability Office. Routine tasks. So when a lot of my friends here talk about high-tech workers, they are talking about scientists, they're talking about all these guys who are going to create jobs, but that is not necessarily the case. Only 6% of H-1B visas were given to workers with highly specialized skills in 2010, according to the GAO. More than 80% of H-1B guest workers are paid wages that are less than American workers in comparable positions, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Over 9 million Americans have degrees in a STEM-related field, but only about 3 million have a job in one. Last year, the top 10 employers of H-1B guest workers were all offshore outsourcing companies. These firms are responsible for shipping large numbers of American information technology jobs to India and other countries. Half of all recent college graduates majoring in computer and information science in the United States did not receive jobs in the information technology sector. So, Mr. President, it seems to me that this is an issue we have got to deal with, and the second amendment that I will be filing today is with Senators Grassley and Harkin, and that amendment would prohibit companies that have announced mass layoffs over the past year from hiring guest workers unless these companies can prove that their overall employment will not be reduced as a result of these mass layoffs. In other words, what we are seeing is a very clear trend. Large corporations are throwing American workers out on the street, and they're bringing in foreign workers to do those very same jobs. And many of these very same companies have moved parts of their corporate world away from the United States into third world countries. So this continues the attack on American workers, and we must stop it. Let me just give you a few examples as I conclude my remarks. In 2012, Hewlett-Packard, one of the large American corporations, announced that it was laying off 30,000 workers at the same time that it hired more than 660 H-1B guest workers. In 2012, Cisco laid off 1,300 employees at the same time that it hired more than 330 H-1B guest workers. In 2012, Yahoo hired more than 135 H-1B guest workers at the same time that it announced that it was laying off over 2,000 workers. Research in Motion hired 24 H-1B guest workers at the same time that it laid off over 5,000 people. So, Mr. President, I think it makes no sense at all that corporations that are laying off American workers are now reaching into the H-1B program to bring in foreign workers. So let me simply conclude by saying this. There is much in this legislation that I support and that I believe the American people support. But problems remain. Problems remain. And the main problem to me is this guest worker concept, which is being widely abused by employers throughout this country. At the very least, I want to see a summer jobs program for our kids who are now losing jobs because of the J-1 program, but we need to do even more than that. So, Mr. President, I look forward to working with my colleagues who have worked so hard on this bill to make it a bill that all Americans and all working people can be supportive of. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to address the senators if in morning business and engage a colloquy with the senator from South Carolina.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in just a couple of minutes, the President of the United States will be announcing that it is now conclusive that Bashar Assad and the Syrian butchers have used chemical weapons, which is, as we all know, a red line which the President of the United States announced that Bashar Assad cannot cross. Now, Assad has been very clever in using small amounts rather than large amounts. But the fact is now we are not the first country to conclude that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons in their attacks on the population of Syria. The President also will announce that we will be assisting the Syrian rebels in Syria by providing them with weapons and other assistance. I applaud the President's decision. 93,000 people dead later, over 1 million refugees, the countries in the surrounding region erupting into sectarian violence, the clear spreading of this conflict into a regional conflict. Sunni, Shia, Saudi, Iran, Russia, all major players. And we see that Jordan is overwhelmed with refugees. Lebanon is experiencing sectarian violence. Iraq is unraveling, and the entire region is bordering on chaos, not to mention the massacre and genocide that's taking place in Syria. So I applaud the President's decision, and I appreciate it. But the President of the United States had better understand that just supplying weapons is not going to change the equation on the ground of the balance of power. These people of the Free Syrian Army need weapons and heavy weapons to counter tanks and aircraft. They need a no-fly zone, and Bashar Assad's air assets have to be taken out and neutralized. And we can do that without risking a single American airplane. We can do it by cratering the runways with cruise missiles, moving the Patriot missiles closer to the border, and protecting a safe zone where they can organize, where they can work, where they can coordinate with the civilian side of the Syrian National Army, and they can have a chance of success. Mr. President, today, Bashar Assad, thanks to Iranians, thanks to Russia, thanks to Hezbollah pouring in by the thousands, thanks to people flowing in from all over the Middle East, including from Iraq back into Syria, they are losing and they're being massacred and they're sustaining incredibly heavy casualties. It's terrible. So I applaud the President's decision. I applaud the fact that he has now acknowledged what the French and others and all the rest of us knew, that Bashar Assad is using chemical weapons. But just to provide additional weapons to the Syrian National Army is not enough. We've got to change the equation on the battleground, and if I might say, I have seen and been in conflicts where there was gradual escalation. They don't win. If all we're going to do is supply weapons, then there will be a commensurate resupply by the Iranians and the Russians and others. So I thank the President for acknowledging that the Syrians are using chemical weapons and massacring their own people, and I applaud his decision to provide additional weapons. I do not, every ounce, every bone in my body knows that simply providing weapons will not change the battlefield equation, and we must change the battlefield equation. Otherwise, you are going to see a regional conflict, the consequences of which we will be paying for a long, long time. And I yield to my colleague from South Carolina.
Well, thank you. I would like to add my voice to the President's decision to act, because I think action by the United States and the international community is required. What does it matter to the average American that we contain this war in Syria and that it ends sooner rather than later? The chemical weapons that now have been acknowledged to be used by Assad against his own people, my goal is to make sure they're not used against us or Israel, our allies throughout the world. And if we don't stop this war, the chemical weapons caches that number in the hundreds of thousands of weapons that could be used, could be deployed, that could kill thousands of Americans or Israelis or people that are aligned with us. So really the President's decision to intervene comes from an escalation of the use of chemical weapons by Assad. As Senator McCain has indicated, the threats to our country are not just from the chemical weapons, but from a regional deterioration. The sitting President of the Senate today, we were in Jordan. The Jordanian government has to accommodate over 560,000 Syrian refugees. 60,000 Syrian children are attending Jordanian schools. The economy in Jordan is about to collapse, and if we lose the king of Jordan, we've lost one of the last moderate voices in the Mideast. So this war has a ripple effect. It's affecting Turkey. It's affecting Iraq. Radical Islamists are flowing in on the Sunni side and the Shia side. There's al-Qaeda elements that are filling in the vacuum because the war has gone on so long. Now you got Hezbollah, a radical Islamic Shia group, and this is turning into a civil war within Syria and a regional conflict. So, to the President, your decision today to get involved is welcome news, but as Senator McCain said, Mr. President, the goal is to end the war, and the only way this war is going to end quickly and on our terms is to neutralize the air assets that Assad enjoys, the air power advantage he has over the rebels. We can crater the runways. There are 4 air bases he uses. We can stop the planes from flying. We can shoot planes down without having one boot on the ground. That's not necessary. But as to Senator McCain's point, the longer this war goes, the more damage to our allies, the more likely the chemical weapons can be used, not just against Syrians, but against us and others. My biggest fear about the war in Syria is that the chemical weapons fall in the hands of radical Islamists, and they're closer today than they've ever been in achieving that goal. So, Mr. President, you made the right call today, but if we don't follow up to end this war with neutralizing Assad's air power, having a no-fly zone so the rebels can reorganize, and when you supply arms to the rebels, we will look long and hard who we give the arms to. But here's the good news. We don't need to give them a bunch of anti-aircraft capability if we crater the runways through the international community using our assets. If we neutralize the air power by blowing up the runway, you don't have to provide the rebels a bunch of anti-aircraft capability. If we'll provide a no-fly zone using Patriot missile batteries, you can protect the people without interjecting massive weapons into the conflict. So, Senator McCain, you've been right about this for a couple of years. This is a big day, and I would conclude with this. Assad is winning. The reason the Russians are providing him more weapons, the reason Hezbollah is in Syria, the reason that the Iranians are so bold is that he is clearly winning, and it is not in our national interest for him to win because the Israelis cannot allow the technology being sold to Assad by the Russians to be present because it will hurt their national security. So I hope by this intervention today to get involved after chemical weapons have been used, that the tide of battle will turn, and if it doesn't turn, it will have catastrophic results for our national security in the region as a whole. So, Mr. President, you chose wisely today to get involved. We support you, but the goal is not to help the rebels. The goal is to end the war before chemical weapons can be used against us and we lose the king of Jordan and the entire Mideast goes up in flames.
Could I ask my colleague, you remember when the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appeared before our committee well over a year ago and said, unsolicited, it's inevitable that Bashar Assad will fall. You remember that? This is from our highest-ranking military officer and our highest defense official as Secretary of Defense. At that time, I said, what makes you so sure? How can you be sure? With the help from Hezbollah, with the help of the Russians at that time and the equipment and arms that they were getting. Don't worry. The fall of Assad is inevitable. Is there anybody today that believes that Bashar Assad is going to fall? I don't think so, because the facts on the ground are he's winning and the slaughter continues. And the latest is 93,000 people who have been massacred, and as the senator from South Carolina just stated, with well over 1 million refugees, which are overwhelming the neighboring countries. Now, it's my understanding that the President has not made the final decision on arming, but he has made the decision that chemical weapons have been used. I think it's obvious that they will be providing weapons. They need a no-fly zone. And I would say that there are military officials in the Pentagon who will say you can't do it and you have to have total mobilization of every single reserve in the world and in the United States, and it's so hard. Well, we spend tens of billions of dollars a year on defense, and if our military can't establish a no-fly zone, then by God, American taxpayer dollars have been terribly wasted. And we ought to have an investigation as to why we can't handle a situation in a third-rate country. I believe we can. I know we can. I know because I talk to people like the head of our Central Command, former head of our Central Command, and our former head of NATO, and others, like General Keane, the architect of the surge. We can go in and establish a no-fly zone, and we can change this equation on the battlefield. Finally, I would ask my colleague, you know, we understand that the American people are war-weary. We're weary because of what happened in Iraq, and we remain in Afghanistan. And Iraq is unraveling, by the way, but Americans are weary. They're tired of reading the casualty lists and the funerals and the terrible tragedies that have befallen American families. That's why neither I nor the senator from South Carolina are saying we want boots on the ground. In fact, we don't want boots on the ground. We know it would be counterproductive. We know it would not lead to victory. But we do know we can provide incredible assistance and change this battlefield equation. And finally, because a lot of Americans haven't paid perhaps as much attention as some of us, and maybe because they're war-weary, I think it would be wise of the President of the United States to go on national television and explain to the American people why we are stopping this genocide, why we are assisting these people who are struggling for the same things that we stand for and believe in, why the United States of America went to Bosnia with air power, not boots on the ground, why we went to Kosovo and didn't put boots on the ground, and how we can help these people while alleviate the unspeakable misery of the Syrian people. And I wonder if my colleague from South Carolina agrees with that.
I would recommend the President educate the world, the American people about what's going on in the Mideast because it's scary. It's really scary. The Iranians are marching toward a nuclear weapon. Israel is becoming more surrounded by radical Islamic nations, not less. The King of Jordan is teetering. And if we lose him, God knows what's going to happen in the Mideast. I would suggest the President take it one step further. Explain to the American people what happens to us if these chemical weapons Assad has used against his own people fall into the hands of radical Islamists who want to do more than just take care of Syria. My big fear is that weapons of mass destruction are going to fall into the hands of radical Islamists, either in Iran or Syria, if we don't act quickly. And the only reason thousands of Americans have been killed in the war on terror, and not millions, they can't get the weapons to kill millions of us. If they could, they would. So I would argue very strongly it is in our national security interest to make sure the war in Syria ends, that Assad is displaced. And finally, Senator McCain, you're right. He is winning. He was supposed to be gone last year. He's never going to be displaced until the tide of battle changes. The way you change the tide of battle is you neutralize his air power. You can do that without mobilizing every reservist, including me. It can be done, and it should be done, and it's in our interest to do it. One last thought. If we do not address the chemical weapons compromise in Syria and end this war before these chemical weapons flow out of Syria, not only will Israel be in the crosshair of radical Islamists with weapons of mass destruction capability, it is only a matter of time till they come here. The next bomb that goes off in a place like Boston could have more than nails and glass in it, because the people who want these weapons in Syria, trying to develop nuclear capability in Iran, if you don't think they're coming after us, you're naive. I know we're war-weary, but I hope we're not too weary to protect our children and grandchildren and ourselves from a threat that's real. I wish it would go away. But you don't make these things go away by wishing. You confront them. And the sooner you confront it, the better off we'll be.
Could I just mention one other? I know that one of my colleagues is waiting on the floor. There's no experience that I think anyone can have to see the terrible wages of war than to go to a refugee camp. The senator from South Carolina and I have been to refugee camps on both the Syrian and the Turkish and the Jordanian border. To see thousands of people living in terribly primitive conditions, to see, as I did in one camp we visited, there had been a rainstorm the night before and people literally living in water, to see the desperation on the faces of the people and the children. And I've had many moving experiences while visiting these refugee camps, but I also think there's an aspect that we ought to understand and appreciate as Americans. They're angry and they're bitter because we wouldn't come to their assistance. I'll never forget a woman who was a school teacher who was escorting me around the refugee camp that said, "Senator McCain, you see all these children here? You see all these children running around everywhere?" And she said, "These children are going to take revenge on those who refuse to help them to stop this slaughter by Bashar Assad." So there are long-term implications, both on a humanitarian side as well as other aspects of this issue. And believe me, it is the greatest blow to Iran if Bashar Assad fell in 25 years. So it's not just a humanitarian issue. If Bashar Assad goes, Hezbollah is disconnected from Iran. The whole equation in the Middle East dramatically changes. If Iran and Bashar Assad succeed, you're going to see a direct threat of the State of Israel, which the Israelis understand, coming from the Golan Heights. So this is not only a humanitarian issue, it is a national security issue. If Iran succeeds, keeping Bashar Assad in power, that will send a message throughout the Middle East about Iranian power, Iranian ability, and Iranian ability to change governments throughout the Middle East. So there's a lot at stake here. I hope the President will go to a no-fly zone and give these people the weapons with which they defend themselves as Russian arms and Iranian arms pour into the country on the side of Bashar Assad. My friends, it's not a fair fight. And we know in that kind of climate and terrain, air power is the deciding factor. So I thank my colleague from South Carolina. Mr. President, I appreciate the patience of the senator from Texas, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, on Friday, the people of Iran head to the polls to make a false choice, ostensibly participating in a democratic process to select a new president. They are really affirming their existing extremist theocracy. They will be forced to select not the candidate of their choice, but the candidates that have been chosen for them by the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Candidates guaranteed to continue the supreme leader's policies of political and religious oppression in pursuit of nuclear capability at all costs. In the United States, we are now engaged in a national dialogue about how we can best preserve our God-given rights, guaranteed to us by our Constitution. We're taking a serious look at the role of government in our lives and revisiting the balance government is striking between security and privacy. But even as we debate these vital issues at home, we should remember those who are denied their liberty in Iran. Today in Iran, the economic picture is grim. 40% of Iranian citizens now live below the poverty line, almost double the rate in 2005. The rial has lost 50% of its value. The official rate of inflation is 32.2%. The real rate is considerably higher. The national rate of unemployment is 11.2%, and it is as high as 20% in certain regions. And basic freedoms, political, religious, speech, the Internet, are under systematic attack by the regime. Sadly, persecution and oppression are the norm in Iran. Iran's political opposition has been effectively silenced. key 2009 opposition leaders, such as Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubeh, have been imprisoned without charge in their own homes for 2 years, with locked doors and windows. The list of presidential candidates has been hand-selected by the supreme leader, not by the Iranian people. American-Iranian pastor Saeed Abedini is right now serving an 8-year sentence in Iran's brutal Evin prison for simply professing his faith. I was proud to sign a letter along with 11 other senators in January to Secretary Clinton advocating for Pastor Abedini's release, and to Secretary Kerry on February 12th, thanking him for his statement in support of Pastor Abedini. There has been a crackdown on Christians in the lead up to this election, including the closing of the Central Assemblies of God Church in Tehran and the detention of Pastor Robert Assarian. Iranian Pastor Behnam Irani may face the death penalty for organizing a 300-strong congregation of the Church of Iran. Iran's 100,000-plus evangelical Christians are suffering brutal oppression right now. And in imitation of China, Iran is attempting to create a sort of internal internet that will block access to international news and social media. Since the 2009 uprising, the Supreme Leader has instituted 4 new entities to restrict internet freedom: the Supreme Council on Cyberspace, the committee charged with determining offensive content, the Cyber Police, and the Cyber Army. And Iran has continued aggressively expanding its influence in the region and beyond. Iran remains a leading state sponsor of terrorism and is increasing its activity. Iran has been so hostile towards the nation of Israel that Prime Minister Netanyahu recently expressed fears of, quote, another Holocaust from Tehran, regardless of any election that may take place. Iran's proxy army, Hezbollah, is supporting Assad's murderous attacks on his own people in Syria. Today, the United Nations estimated that 93,000 people have been slaughtered in Syria since the uprising began in 2011. Iran's fingerprints are on those murders. Iran is not only expanding its own influence in the region through closer ties with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, but it's also expanding its influence in Latin America. And most troubling, Iran is proceeding undeterred in its pursuit of nuclear weapons capability. In my judgment, Mr. President, there is no greater threat to the national security of the United States than the prospect of a nuclear Iran. And we need to be unequivocal and speak with absolute clarity that the United States will do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Unfortunately, the message to date from the United States has at times seemed muddled. On the one hand, Secretary of State John Kerry has asked Congress to relax sanctions around the Iranian presidential elections so that his diplomatic efforts have a, quote, window to work. On the other hand, the Obama administration recently announced new sanctions on Iran's currency and a new initiative to get communications devices to the Iranian people. But both efforts, however well-intentioned, came too late to have any real impact on this election. Today, the United States Senate is taking encouraging action. I'm pleased that today the Senate hopes to pass a resolution, S-Res 154, reaffirming our call for free and fair elections, a resolution I fully support. The resolution also condemns the widespread human rights violations of the government of Iran, calls on the government of Iran to respect its people's freedom of expression and association, and expresses our ongoing support to the people of Iran for their calls for a democratic government that upholds freedom, civil liberties, and the rule of law. The Iranian people may well be confused about where the United States stand, especially after we stood silently by when they took to the street 4 years ago during the Green Revolution. But it was not always this way. 26 years ago this week, President Ronald Reagan stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and challenged the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall that divided the eastern and western halves of the city. No more important words have been spoken by a leader in modern times. Today, I ask all Americans to join me in likewise urging the regime in Iran to tear down the walls of political and religious persecution, to relieve the pain of the unnecessary economic hardship, and to renounce the isolation caused by Tehran's aggressive and belligerent policies. To those right now imprisoned and being persecuted in Iran, I would repeat to you the words of encouragement President Reagan gave when he knew that the tyranny represented by the Berlin Wall would not stand. As President Reagan observed, for it cannot withstand faith. It cannot withstand truth. It cannot withstand freedom. That's the very same message we should convey to the people of Iran as they suffer under tyrannical theocracy. And to the Supreme Leader, I would say, stop oppressing your people. Stop persecuting Christians. Stop pursuing nuclear weapons capability. Stop stifling freedom of speech. And allow real and free elections. Free the Iranian people. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from West Virginia.
I ask to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, I appreciate the power of the free enterprise system. It is one of the reasons for America's greatness, and I know from experience that private businesses do some things better than the government ever could. But over the last couple of decades, the United States has increasingly relied on private contractors to do the work that the men and women in our armed forces used to do. And they are getting exorbitant salaries to do the same work. In some cases, almost twice the salary of the President of the United States. To the people of West Virginia and to me, it doesn't make any sense to pay a defense contractor up to $763,000 a year. That's almost twice as much as our Commander-in-Chief and almost 4 times as much as our Secretary of Defense. And if we don't, if we do nothing about this, this figure will automatically rise to $951,000 next year. $951,000. That's almost $1 million a year right in the middle of sequestration when we're cutting everything. Now, with the war in Afghanistan winding down, it's only natural for defense contractors to be looking for new opportunities. And the southern border of our country is one of the places they are eyeing. In fact, the New York Times says some of them are getting ready to demonstrate military-grade and long-range camera systems this summer in an effort to secure billion-dollar contracts with Homeland Security. I understand that we need the expertise of the private industry to secure our borders, but taxpayers should not be responsible for the exorbitant salaries that these contractors are demanding. So I'm offering an amendment that would cap compensation for private contractors employed for border security. The cap would be $230,700 annually, which is the most a government civilian can be paid in a given year. So it's in line with what we're doing. That is significantly more than we pay the Defense Secretary, Secretary Hagel, or a Homeland Security Secretary, Napolitano. There's nothing in my amendment that would prevent contractors from making more than $230,000. We're not saying you can't make more than that. We're just saying you can't pass that through to the taxpayers of America. Pay it out of the profits of your company. And the only thing I'm preventing is from us, the taxpayers, from having to foot the bill. I've heard some proposals to bring that figure down to $487,000. That's an improvement, but frankly, I can't look West Virginians in the eye, and I'm sure you would have a hard time looking at your fellow Massachusettsians, and try to justify paying government contractors that much money, because it's just hard to justify. It can't be justified, Mr. President. We need to get our fiscal house in order, and we can't do that if we allow private contractors to charge the taxpayers exorbitant salaries of almost $1 million. It's time for common sense controls on contractor salaries. So I'm asking for the support of this amendment when it comes to the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm sorry, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
President, I appreciate the opportunity to share some remarks after our Armed Services Committee hearing, and I appreciate the eloquence of my friend and colleague from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, on the issue he just mentioned. But the committee did reduce almost by half the amount that contractors could bill, and we may see further changes in that issue. But when you talk about money, real money, there's a problem we've got with the bill that came out of committee. And it's such a grim, serious matter. And we've got to talk about it, we've got to be upfront about it, and nobody can be confused about it. I was pleased with Chairman Levin. He is a wonderful chairman of our committee. We've consistently had bipartisan votes. I wanted to be a bipartisan vote for the bill and voted for it today. But I'm not sure that was the right vote, because I said then during the committee that we've got a serious problem in that the amount of money that was appropriated for the bill, $552 billion, it was $52 billion, 550, I believe, $52 billion over the current law. And there's a hope and a belief that we can fix that gap between now and the time it comes to the floor. Secretary Hagel was before the Budget Committee yesterday, and I'm ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, and he indicated he's working on a plan to help us be within the law. He also indicated that to, I believe, Chairman Levin and Ranking Member Inhofe on the Armed Services Committee. But let's be sure what the situation is. August of 2011, we had run up huge debt. We'd hit our debt ceiling again. And the administration, the President, wanted to raise the debt ceiling $2.1 trillion. One of the largest, maybe the largest raise of the debt ceiling in history. And that was supposed to take us 2 or 3 years. Well, we've already hit that debt ceiling again now, it appears. Soon we'll be having to pass legislation, all the little extensions and maneuvering to extend the debt ceiling a little longer are being exercised, but we'll soon have to vote again to raise the debt ceiling. But in August of 2011, after much intensity of effort, legislation passed. I opposed it out of one of my biggest concerns was what it was doing to the defense budget. But the bill passed. And it set up a committee, and it said, and the committee was to deal with future cuts and long-term entitlement programs and other programs. That was their goal. They were given that challenge. But fundamentally, the bill that passed raised the debt ceiling $2.1 trillion, but it reduced spending the growth of spending, better said, over the next 10 years by $2.1 trillion. And unfortunately, those reductions in the growth of spending fell disproportionately on the Defense Department. And I'll mention that in a minute. But the agreement was clear. There was no tax increases. There was no other gimmicks to it other than the spending level would be reduced over 10 years by $2.1 trillion. We were then spending at the level of $3.7 trillion a year, which would mean $37 trillion over 10. We were on track to spend $47 trillion over 10, an increase substantial from the current level. So the agreement was that it would reduce the growth to $45 trillion instead of $47 trillion. So that was the deal. And there was a hope that the committee would reach an even more historic agreement in which entitlements, Social Security, and Medicare would be put on a firm foundation, and we would get the country on a right track. The committee failed. They did not reach an agreement. So in law, there remained the BCA. And within the Budget Control Act, there was the sequester. And the sequester would take another $500 billion. The BCA took about $500 billion out of the defense budget, and the sequester part of the BCA took another one. And when the committee didn't reach an agreement, there's another $500 billion to be taken out of the Defense Department. $1 trillion. Defense Department represents 1/6 of the federal budget. The cuts, almost $1 trillion, would come out of the defense, 1/6 of the government. That's half of the cuts that were to be taken from our entire government. And when you look at the numbers over 10 years, the defense budget, adjusted for inflation, would take a 14% reduction in its funding, whereas the remaining 5/6 of the federal government would have a 44% increase in its funding. So this is the kind of mal-apportionment of belt-tightening that ought not to happen. And so I thought, and I believe the American people thought, that we should get together with the President and see how we couldn't avoid this problem and spread the cuts out through other agencies and departments, many of which had no reductions whatsoever. Of course, Social Security had no reduction whatsoever. Medicaid, one of the fastest growing programs of all, had 0 reductions in spending on the sequester. Food stamps that had gone from $20 billion to $80 billion, increased 4-fold in 12 years, got 0 cuts. And a lot of other programs got 0 cuts, whereas the Defense Department was getting hammered. And people think, well, the war is coming down, the Defense Department can handle it. No, that's not the way it works. The war costs are entirely separate. This is a reduction of the base defense budget, where we pay our soldiers, pay our electric bills, maintain our bases, maintain our aircraft, our ships, our ports, and our bases around the world. That's what's being cut, the fundamental strength of the military, and it is too much. Can they survive it? Not without doing some damage. Sure, they'll survive, and they'll be able to get by. But what ought to be done is we ought to get together with the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military and work with the Secretary of Defense, former Senator Chuck Hagel, member of this body, and get together and figure out a way to have some other parts of this government take some of the reductions in spending that are falling disproportionately on the Defense Department. It's just that simple. Now, I suggested to Secretary Hagel yesterday at the Budget Committee that, yes, he ought to be talking with Congress. Yes, we have eventually the power of the purse, but nothing was going to happen in the United States Senate that President Obama doesn't agree to. Senator Reid is not going to support anything President Obama doesn't agree to. And it looks to me like the members of the Democratic Conference are going to stick together on this issue. They have so far. Months have gone by, and the sequester hasn't been fixed. So I said, I assume, Mr. Secretary, you have the phone number to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think you better call over there to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, who has an obligation to the men and women he's deploying all over the world and sending into harm's way, and who has an obligation to maintain the strength of our military. Yes, it can be more efficient. It's already taking $500 billion in cuts, and it may take a little more. But these cuts are more than can be easily assimilated. So I just feel like that this has drifted to a point where we're in a serious predicament. The military has already had to lay off civilians, workers of the United States government for 11 days, furloughed them without pay, and done other things to try to stay within the financial constraints that they're now under because the cuts are beginning to bite. So this is the situation we're in. Now, I want to say to my colleagues, I do not believe the defense bill that came out of committee, and we had a nice discussion today on the multiple issues that are important to America's defense, and we had a good collegial feeling. I don't believe that bill should pass the United States Senate. I don't believe it will pass the United States Senate if it violates the spending limits we voted just 2 years ago. I mean, just think of it. We agreed to reduce the growth of spending from $37 billion. It's now at that rate 2 years ago. We were going to let it grow to 47. We reduced the growth to 45. And we come back to the American people and say, we can't affect that now. We can't reduce the growth in spending just that little bit. We promised you that we would raise the debt ceiling, but I know it made you angry, American people. You were mad at us because we mismanaged your money. But we promise we'll reduce the growth of spending by $2.1 trillion. Trust us, we'll do it. And here we are. President Obama, 6 months later, produced a budget that wiped out all those cuts and increased taxes and spending. And this has been the pattern we've been in. So I got to say, we do not need to have this happen. So I'm prepared to meet with the President. I'm prepared to meet with the Secretary of Defense, the Office of Management and Budget, and talk about where we can find other reductions in spending and reduce some of the reductions on the Defense Department. We need to reduce a good many of those on the Defense Department, frankly. And then the Defense Department can phase in some reductions in spending over the out years. They can do that, but too much too fast is really destabilizing. No business would do that. And so we've got to figure out a way to make this system work. So, Mr. President, I was pleased to work with Senator Levin and Senator Inhofe today. I want to be cooperative and be positive in our efforts. I like much of what we did with the budget, but the authorization bill in Armed Services Committee, but we just didn't talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the sequester, the real danger that we have there. And we're going to have to discuss it now. It'll be part of the floor discussion and debate. If it's not fixed, it can be fixed. I think we're all prepared to work for it. And I don't believe this country will sink into the ocean. I don't believe this country is going to have to close our parks. I don't believe this country is going to have to end tours at the White House to reduce the growth of spending by $2 trillion from $47 to $45 trillion over the next 10 years. I don't believe that's going to bankrupt us. But we ought to do it in a smart way. We should have every agency and department of government tighten their belt, not just some. And we slipped into this when the sequester was written to try to effect some political result that didn't occur. And now we're got to, as a responsible Senate, consider what the right thing for America is. And the right thing is to have all agencies and departments tighten their belt and to reduce the pressure that's now falling on our Defense Department. Mr. President, I thank the chair and would yield the floor and would note the absence of a quorum and yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.